In this video, I'm going to discuss how to answer any question that begins with the words, would it be wrong to what? Well, you can fill that in with whatever interests you. I'm going to argue that determining whether a specific act is wrong is a two-step process. The first step is to determine if it is a type of act that's wrong. Is it a type of act like breaking a promise? Lying, fraud, drunk driving, vandalism, theft, assault, rape, slavery, murder, genocide? For this, I offer the following definition. To say that an act is wrong is to say that people generally have reasons to use condemnation to promote a universal aversion to performing acts of that type. So now what does this mean? To explain it in more detail, I want to look at each of the parts. First, I want to take a look at the concept of wrong itself. This term is used to refer to people that we, most of us, almost all of us, have reasons to condemn or criticize. It refers to what you have reasons to criticize in others and perhaps in what others have reasons to criticize in you. This is built into the definition. To identify certain behavior as wrong is to identify it as behavior that people generally have reasons to condemn, to criticize. At the same time, to say that something is wrong is not to say that it's wrong at all times and in all situations. An act can be wrong, and yet a person may find themselves in a situation where they have to do it anyway. This happens. For people who have some training in academic philosophy, what I'm talking about here is what the philosopher W.D. Ross called a prima facie wrong, or what other philosophers call a pro tanto wrong. It's a wrong that can be outweighed. Take, for example, the breaking of a promise. Using this definition, we can say that it's wrong to break a promise. People generally have reasons to condemn those who break promises, so as to create an aversion to breaking promises, which in turn will make the breaking of promises less common. Seriously, imagine what society would be like if people were to break promises on a whim. We wouldn't have any promises if people could not rely on them. However, the moral wrongness of breaking promises is not absolute. Sometimes a greater moral obligation will outweigh a lesser one. Imagine that you've promised to meet your sister for lunch. Because you promised, you really should go, even if you don't want to. However, just before you leave, your child falls off of her bike and breaks her arm. Your obligation to see to the medical needs of your child would outweigh your obligation to keep your promise. You call your sister and say, "I'm sorry, I can't make it." Interestingly, we would still expect there to be a twinge of regret. A person would express this by an apology and an offer to make it up to you, an offer that the other person, understanding the situation, would likely dismiss. But this twinge is there to mark the fact that one takes the obligation to keep promises seriously. Now, even though keeping promises is a moral obligation, it can be outweighed by non-moral concerns as well. Again, imagine that you've promised to meet your sister for lunch. However, earlier in the morning, your car breaks down. The garage tells you that they can have your car ready in time to make your appointment, but it will cost you $5,000. On the other hand, if you let them keep the car overnight, they'll get to it when they can, and it will cost you $200. Assuming that you have $5,000 to spend, you still wouldn't be obligated to spend the money to keep a trivial promise. Of course, a theory on what it means for something to be wrong can't just throw these exceptions out whenever it seems convenient. A good theory must say something about how to tell a good reason to break a promise, for example, from a bad or not good enough reason. This theory will do that. I'll say more on this matter below, though presenting that part of the theory in detail will require its own video. I still think I should give you a hint. The answer is found in the fact that we are using condemnation to create an aversion to breaking promises, and aversions can be outweighed. We want each other to be reluctant to break promises, but not so reluctant that people will have to abandon their injured children to meet their sister for lunch. As I said, I'll add more details later. So the 2 points that I want you to keep in mind at the start are these. First, Moral wrongness has to do with condemnation, with what people have reasons to criticize in each other and actually in themselves as well. Second, nothing is wrong in an absolute sense. People sometimes find themselves in situations where they will have to do something that is wrong. Next, I'm going to go through the parts of this definition and explain what each part means. I'll be starting with the phrase, people generally. This account says that if a certain type of act is wrong, then people generally have reasons to condemn those who would perform that type of act. People generally do have reasons to condemn those who break promises. The phrase people generally points to the fact that something does not become wrong because some small segment of the population has reasons to condemn those who would perform acts of that type. For example, I have a reason to condemn anybody who would not give me all of their money. My reason to do so does not create in others an obligation to give me all of their money. I am probably the only person who has a reason to condemn those who do not give me all of their money. It's not true of people generally that they have reasons to do this, whereas it is true of people generally that they have reasons to condemn those who break promises, vandalize, steal property, drive while drunk, rape, murder, and the like. At the same time, the existence of a few people who have no reason to condemn those who perform a certain type of act doesn't prevent that type of act from being wrong. A person living alone on a small island and who doesn't care about anybody else in the world has no reason to condemn drunk drivers. However, this does not change the fact that people generally have reasons to condemn drunk drivers. The existence of such a person does not prevent it from being the case that drunk driving is wrong. In summary, the phrase people generally points to the fact that a lot of people have to have reasons to give everybody a reason not to perform acts of a type to make performing acts of that type wrong. At the same time, a lot of people doesn't mean everybody, and the existence of a few exceptions doesn't prevent it from being the case that it's wrong to perform a certain type of act. Next comes the phrase, have reasons. What does it mean to have a reason to do something, or to have a reason not to do something else? I use what is called the Humean theory of reasons, attributed to David Hume. It says that if you have a reason to do something, you must have a desire that would be served by doing it. Here's an example. You probably have an aversion to pain. If not, try to play along. Your aversion to pain gives you a reason not to put your hand on a hot stove, right? You may have other reasons, but the fact that it will be painful is almost certainly in the top three. To say that you have a reason not to put your hand on a hot stove is to say that you have a desire that would be served by not putting your hand on a hot stove, and your desire not to be in extreme pain is that desire. Here's another example. I like the taste of Diet Dr. Pepper. My preference for the taste of Diet Dr. Pepper gives me a reason to choose to buy Diet Dr. Pepper when I'm at the grocery store. If somebody were to ask why is he buying Diet Dr. Pepper, the fact that I prefer the taste answers that question. Let's go back to the aversion to pain. I want to point your attention to the fact that your aversion to pain not only gives you a reason not to put your hand on a hot stove, it also gives you a reason to give other people a reason not to do things that could result in you being in extreme pain. Reasons not to set you on fire, for example. Or reasons not to drive while drunk, since drunk driving could result in you experiencing some extremely painful injuries. Here's another example. People generally have desires that are best served by staying alive. Desires to create, or to have certain experiences that dead people find difficult to do or to have. These desires not only provide you with a reason not to jump off of a tall building, it provides you with a reason to give other people reasons not to push you off of a tall building. And again, given the fact that drunk drivers tend to kill people, these desires give you a reason to give other people a reason not to drive while drunk. Applying this line of thought, you and almost everybody else on the planet, including me, has reasons to give everybody else reasons not to break promises, not to take things without permission, not to drive while drunk, and not to commit acts like vandalism, rape, or murder. And we can give each other reasons not to perform acts of these types by giving each other desires and aversions that would be served by not performing acts of these types. There is one very important implication coming from the Humean theory of reasons that I want to mention. Reasons to perform or not perform some action that do not ultimately link to desires and aversions do not exist. Any claim that a desire-independent reason is a reason to praise or condemn is false, and we can ignore it. This brings us to the next part of our definition. Morality is about the use of praise and condemnation. The term wrong is a term of condemnation. Consequently, the question of when we have reason to call something wrong is the question of when we have reason to condemn. Let us consider the question of whether alcoholism is a moral failing or an illness. This is the same as the question of whether alcoholism can be cured or treated using condemnation. Is condemnation an efficient way to get the alcoholic to stop drinking? If the answer is no, if condemnation is not an efficient way to treat alcoholism, then alcoholism is not a moral issue. It's a medical issue. Moral issues concern behaviors that praise and condemnation can influence. Because we have this ability to influence each other's values using praise and condemnation, we're invited to ask the question, what do we have reasons to praise? What do we have reasons to condemn? Breaking promises, lying, fraud, taking property without consent, vandalism, rape, murder, all of these are things that people generally have reasons to condemn, so as to make these types of actions less common. The term wrong is a term of disapproval, a term of condemnation. The question, what do we have reasons to call wrong, is the question, what do we have reasons to condemn? The answer to the question, what is it that people generally have reasons to call wrong, is the answer to the question, what is it that people generally have reasons to condemn? So why respond to wrongdoing with condemnation? The efficient response to somebody performing an act of a type that people have reasons to make less common is a response that functions to make that type of act less common. The function of condemnation is to shape people's values, to give them an aversion to performing acts of the type that's being condemned. We can make it the case that people are more reliable in keeping their promises, for example, by giving them a reason to keep their promise. As discussed earlier, giving people a reason to keep their promise means making it the case that they have desires that are served by keeping their promises. And we can do this in two different ways. One way is to link keeping promises to desires and aversions the agent already has. Here I'm talking about the use of incentives and deterrents, of rewards and punishments. For example, we can give people a reason not to drive while drunk by taking away their driver's license or throwing them in jail if we catch them driving while drunk. Another way is to create in people new desires and aversions that would be served by, for example, keeping promises. A person that doesn't like pain has a reason not to do something that would cause them to be in pain. And a person that doesn't like beans has a reason to choose something other than the bean casserole for lunch. Similarly, a person that doesn't like to break their promises has a reason to keep their promises. By condemning those who break promises, we promote in people an aversion to breaking promises, and by promoting an aversion to breaking promises, we give people a reason to keep their promises, and by giving people a reason to keep their promises, we make the breaking of promises less common than it would otherwise have been. As I said at the beginning, moral wrongs are not absolute. They can be outweighed. This discussion of nurturing aversions allows me to say more about that feature. Again, consider the fact that an aversion to pain gives one a reason to avoid performing acts that will cause one to be in pain. However, this aversion to pain can be overridden when something more important comes along. If the only way to save one's child is to grab a burning hot lever and one knows it's going to hurt, one still has a reason not to pull the lever, but has an even stronger reason to endure the pain and pull the lever. If the only way to save one's child is to break a promise to meet one's sister, and one hates to break a promise, one still has a stronger reason to endure the discomfort of breaking a promise and to save one's child. We use condemnation to create in people an aversion to breaking promises, but not such a strong aversion that one would abandon one's child to keep a promise. Now, why does the definition refer to creating universal aversions? Moral claims are claims about what all people should do if they should find themselves in a particular situation. Moral claims are, by definition, universal. So when asking whether a particular type of action is wrong, we ask, what would happen if everybody acted that way in those circumstances? In the last part of the definition, I say that these prima facie wrongs are concerned with an act being of a particular type. We give names to many of these types: lying, fraud, drunk driving, vandalism, theft, assault, rape, murder. We do this because this is how desires and aversions work. A person who learns to like or dislike something learns to like or dislike a particular type of thing. They like computer games, or they have an interest in history. They like broccoli, or they hate beans. Accordingly, through our expressions of approval and disapproval, we aim to get people to like or dislike certain types of actions, such as the action type, breaking a promise. This then is step one in answering the question of whether it would be wrong to do something. We determine if it is the type of act that people generally have reasons to condemn. We have reasons to condemn when we have reasons to nurture a universal aversion to performing acts of that type. But I've argued above, an act can be an act of a particular type, and the wrongness of the act can still be outweighed by other concerns. I also said that our theory must include an account of what it takes to outweigh a prima facie wrong. Here I'll give an outline of that feature. The test of whether an agent's reason to perform an act outweighs the prima facie wrongness of that act is similar to the test for wrongness itself. We ask if people generally have reasons to allow everybody to use that excuse. In other words, we seek to answer the question, what would it be like if everybody was allowed to break their promises in these types of circumstances? Let me return to my previous example, the example of somebody leaving to meet their sister for lunch as promised when their child falls off of a bike and breaks an arm. Do people generally have reasons to allow anybody to use the need to care for the health of one's child to outweigh the desire to keep a trivial promise? It seems reasonable that we do. Consequently, the answer to the question, would it be wrong for me to break this trivial promise and instead get my child's broken arm tended to, is no, it would not be wrong. Next, consider a case where a person borrows $50 with a promise to pay it back tomorrow. The next day arrives, and the individual has the $50 and is ready to pay back the loan. However, the agent wants a new video game. Do people generally have reasons to accept this as a universal reason not to repay a debt as promised? If we allowed such trivial reasons to outweigh the repaying of debts, then we could expect few, if any, debts to ever be repaid, and nobody would ever be able to borrow money. When somebody borrows money, they are promising not to let trivial wants outweigh their intent to repay the loan. The answer to the question, would it be wrong for me to spend the money I need to repay my debt on this trivial luxury, is yes, it would be wrong. Let's consider another example. Would it be wrong for me to have consenting sex with another adult of the same gender? Note that my own sexual orientation is not even at issue in answering this question. It is perfectly legitimate for a person to be morally permitted to do something they do not want to do. I hate spectator sports like baseball and football, but that's not relevant to answering the question of whether it would be morally wrong of me to watch a game of baseball or football. In this case, we don't even get out of part one of our test as to whether such an act would be wrong. Having consensual sex with another adult of the same gender is not a type of act that tends to cause harm to others. Consequently, it's not a type of act that others have reasons to condemn people for performing. It's not a prima facie wrong. Therefore, there is no reason to demand that people have an aversion to performing such an act that might, in some circumstances, need to be outweighed. The answer to the question, would it be wrong for me to have consenting sex with another adult of the same gender, is no. We sometimes hear the argument that we must condemn homosexual relationships because if we do not, then we must accept sex between adults and children. This is a nonsense argument. Sex between adults and children are acts of a type that tend to cause harm to others, the child. Consequently, they are acts of a type that people generally have reasons to condemn. Indeed, people have reasons to nurture such a strong aversion that it is difficult to imagine a scenario in which this aversion can be outweighed. The moral permissibility of having sex with a consenting adult does not imply the moral permissibility of having sex with a child. In summary, I've tried to explain how one can go about answering the question of whether it would be wrong to perform some action. Step 1. Ask if people generally have reasons to use condemnation to promote an aversion to performing that type of action. Step 2. Ask if the reason the agent would perform the action is a reason that anybody can use to perform acts of that type. If the act is of a type that people generally have reasons to promote an aversion to performing, like breaking promises or vandalism or theft, etc., and the agent's reasons for performing that act are not reasons that anybody can use, then the act is wrong. In saying that it is wrong, one is saying that people generally have reasons to condemn the agent or any agent who performs an act of that type in those circumstances. From this account, individuals or whole cultures can be mistaken about what they have reasons to condemn. They can believe that they have reasons to condemn certain types of acts when in fact they do not, such as homosexuality. And they can fail to believe or fail to fully appreciate the reasons they have to condemn certain types of actions. A great deal depends on getting the moral facts right and then acting in accordance with those facts. If we get the moral facts right, we praise what we have reasons to praise and condemn what we have reasons to condemn. If we get the moral facts wrong, then we praise what we have no reason to praise and condemn what we have no reason to condemn. The second mistake, condemning what we have no reason to condemn, adds misery to society for no good reason, for no reason at all. Another type of moral mistake is failing to praise what we have reasons to praise, or worse, condemning what we have reasons to praise. The cost of this mistake is that we fail to obtain the benefits that we could harvest by nurturing a useful trait. For example, a failure to praise kindness and helpfulness, or worse, condemning kindness and helpfulness, means a society with less kindness and helpfulness, and with less of the benefits that these traits provide. But by far the most costly moral error involves failing to condemn that which there are reasons to condemn, or worse, praising what there are reasons to condemn. The society that makes this mistake suffers the consequences, and the consequences can be tremendous. People end up being abused, exploited, enslaved, tortured, and killed by the millions because of a failure to condemn what there are reasons to condemn, a failure to condemn that which produces these consequences. And far too often, people praise what they have reasons to condemn. They praise and reward the abusers, exploiters, enslavers, torturers, and killers, and make them the most powerful members of society. If you think that I've said something here that others should hear, then I encourage you to help them hear it. And if not, of course, then don't. In the next video, I'm going to highlight one of these moral mistakes, a failure to condemn, and even our tendency to praise, the liar. A liar is a parasite that profits at the expense of its host. Its hosts are the people who believe the lies and who sacrifice themselves to feed money and power to the parasite. There is no drunk driver, suicide bomber, or child molester who inflicts nearly as much harm on others as the liar. And yet we fail to give them the condemnation they deserve. I hope you will be there.